Sometimes a movie can be a best horror movie you never saw candidate, but there are other instances where a movie has been seen and talked about, but altogether lost to time. Richard Stanley has had a long career in terms of how long he's been active, but he has a very small amount of output in terms of actual number of projects. While the saga of his journey to direct the big-budget remake of The Island of Doctor Moreau and subsequent firing has been widely captured in the documentary Lost Soul, and his latest success with The Color Out of Space was highly regarded, but tinged with controversial allegations.
I don't know what I believe anymore.
He had a couple of gems before all that. Dust Devil, his sophomore effort, still very much so belongs in the best horror movie you never saw category, and I'll get to that one eventually. But Hardware is such a unique animal that I had the urge to revisit and remember why I dug it all those years ago.
Nice hearing from you, Carlos.
Richard Stanley started his career with a few short movies ranging from 10 to 45 minutes, and a couple of these short excursions led to his first two feature films. While the short films got him noticed, the South African filmmaker cut his teeth on music videos before getting the chance to make a post-apocalyptic feature-length film. On top of that, it was somehow shot and made for under $1 million, but it looks a lot better.
$1 million.
While it excels at utilizing minimal locations, the actors in it and practical effects go a long way to give it a much bigger budget feeling. The Weinstein brothers picked it up for distribution, but not with Miramax. The movie was released in September and October of 1990 by Millimeter Films, which was their earlier production company. It made back $5.7 million and had middling reviews, but more importantly showed that Stanley was a director who could get a movie made and have it be successful.
No, it has to be now. I'm talking about big bucks. Savvy?
The movie was called derivative of things like Alien and Terminator for obvious reasons. The central robot stalker could be right out of Skynet's early arsenal to go after John Connor, and the isolation and claustrophobia just seethes into almost every scene after the first 20 minutes. It wears its inspiration of feeling the xenomorph on its futuristic sleeve.
This is deep.
Going beyond that though, the movie had more inspiration to it whether it was intentional or not. While its admitted and direct inspirations were from the works of Philip K. Dick, Damnation Alley, and Soylent Green, it bared a little too much resemblance to a comic called Shock that appeared in the weekly British Sci-Fi series 2000 AD in 1980.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
The creators sued and were successful enough to not only get the writer's credit, but also get a little based on blurb in later releases of the movie. Think Terminator having to acknowledge the great Harlan Ellison in his story Soldier of Tomorrow. Hardware follows a man named Mo who buys the head of a scrap robot that was found by a wanderer. Mo's girlfriend is an artist and he gives the head to her to use in her sculptures as a gift, but later finds out that the robot may have been something called a Mark 13. He goes back to his friend at the Junker area, but he's dead, and by the time he goes back to his girlfriend, the robot head has used the rest of the scrap to make a body and begins to wreak havoc. It kills a peeping Tom neighbor and the security team, among others, but also one of the main characters before Jill, the girlfriend, figures out its weakness and stops it once and for all. Well, at least that one. As the government shows us, apparently they've approved the Mark 13 for mass production. The cast is filled with fun musician cameos like Iggy Pop as the voice of Angry Bob on the radio, and Lemmy, who if Airheads taught us anything, is God, as a post-apocalyptic cabbie. The other actors in it include Mark Northover, who you may recognize from Willow, John Lynch, who would go on to show up in the TV series The Terror and 2024's The Watchers, and William Hootkins. Hootkins would end up with over 120 credits to his name, but will probably be forever known as Porkins or Red 6 from Star Wars.
I can hold it. Pull up! No, I'm all right.
That's a shame, as he would appear in a ridiculous amount of stuff from Flash Gordon to Indiana Jones to Batman, and even play a character called John Carpenter in a movie called Death Machine. Some of his dialogue and actions here, though, make his the most unnerving and unforgettable role. The two leads, not including the killer robot, are played by the gorgeous Stacey Travis, who is a redhead for the role, and a young Dylan McDermott in only his 6th appearance. Travis's first role would be in Phantasm 2, but she would go on to appear in other genre fare like Venom, Dracula Rising, and Deadly Dreams. McDermott would also show up in a killer episode of Tales from the Crypt, but he had a good run on American Horror Story. The movie's 94 minutes go by fast, especially after the initial conceit for the movie kicks in, and it's a shame that it's so damn hard to come by. One of my favorite designer Blu-ray labels for horror movies, Severin Films, had an awesome region-free Blu-ray in 2009, but it's long since out of print, and the movie never streams anywhere. I hate to say this, but you need to watch this movie any way you can. While Stanley hasn't done that many movies, he certainly has a flair for storytelling and visuals, with an emphasis on the last part. The colors overwhelm at times, with the wasteland being a brown dreamscape of fuzzy textures and sounds, and when the building of the main characters loses power, the red color is oppressive in its danger. There are a lot of views from the robot's point of view, or the pervy neighbor's night vision camera, that ensure very few shots and angles will be the same, even with the previously stated use of very few locations and environments. One thing that I don't think gets nearly enough attention is the score, which is done by Simon Boswell, who also did movies like Santa Sangre, The Crying Game, and Stanley's own Dust Devil from a couple years later. As I said, there are a bunch of reasons why the movie works so well, including the actors, score, direction, and overall story, but there are a few things that really stand out. The first one is how gory the movie is. It almost got an X rating received due to the violence, and boy does it still deliver on this. The kills in the movie don't happen as frequently as other horror movies, but when they happen, they are glorious, or maybe gorious is the right word. The first one kind of tricks you here too, as the shop owner doesn't get more than some poisoning before he dies. From then on though, it's pretty brutal. The pervy neighbor, played by Hootkins, goes over to open the blinds so he can continue his perviness, and the killbot is waiting for him. It injects him with poison, or acid, it's kinda hard to tell, removes his eyes, and then drills into his midsection. I tell you this because my editor probably won't be able to show you much of anything here. Our hero is next, and even if his actual death isn't as violent, it's still harsh and we get some good arm gore. Finally, the two team security members for the building get ripped apart and shot when they try to stop the robot. The second thing that stood out to me, and I already spoil it, so I'll lean into that, is the creative decision to have the art sculptor be the hero and not only kill off Dylan McDermott before the final fight, but also not have him be involved in much of the action at all. I know it's not reinventing the wheel, but absolutely sets itself up as a more traditional hero complex with the guy saving the girl. She holds her own in less of a Sarah Connor in T2 and more like Ripley from Alien. Jill may be a sculptor in the beginning of the movie, but she also isn't dumb or helpless. She uses her quick thinking and whatever she has in her apartment to go on both the defense and the offense and attack her pursuer. She more than holds her own, and in fact figures out the way to stop the thing permanently in what turns out to be a fairly easy trick in line with War of the Worlds aliens being stopped by the common cold, or the invaders from Signs not realizing that the planet they invaded is 71% covered in the thing that can kill them. Whoops. The final thing that gives this movie so much damn charm is what it isn't. The movie, possible plagiarism aside, doesn't do a whole lot new, but it does do it differently, which means something. Unlike his second feature, Dust Devil, which I didn't fully get when I initially saw it, this movie appeals to near anyone looking for a good time, especially a teenager who thought this was a kind of forbidden fruit. It has a dash of sex and nudity, a post-apocalyptic setting that speaks to gamers and sci-fi aficionados alike, more gore than you'd expect after the slightly creepy first act, and just fun characters and concepts. As a first feature film, it shows a lot of promise for a young filmmaker with a ton of ideas. The gore had to be trimmed to get its R rating, and Stanley had a sequel planned that would follow Jill as she tried to stop the remainder of the robots from being used and potentially taking over the world. Sadly, much like many of Stanley's projects that were planned, like a trilogy for H.P. Lovecraft, this just wasn't to be. Hardware is a great time, and it's a shame that it isn't easier to find. Sure, you can get a used copy of that Severin disc that I talked about, but $100 can be a hard pill to swallow even if the thing was brand new. It's possible that we could get a future physical release, or you could always import a copy if you have the means and, if you'll excuse me, the hardware for it. But for now, I'd say you can just catch it somewhere, then consider yourself lucky. It's the type of movie that rarely gets made anymore, and while that's a bummer, it's nice to know these still exist and maybe inspire filmmakers in the future.